absolutely thrilled to be joined by someone who's doing some very helpful things for our community and our surrounding area during this time. At the Baldwin Public Library, normally you would see Jeff Jimison as the Idea Labs Supervisor. Now you may see him next to his 3D printer doing some very interesting projects to help people in our community. We welcome him to the program now. Jeff, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks, Tyler. Thanks for having me.
So first off, during normal times, what can people expect to experience at the Baldwin Public Library's Idea Labs?
So the Idea Lab is a makerspace. And if you're not familiar with the term makerspace, it's basically a public workshop. We have all kinds of tools and equipment that anyone from anywhere can use to work on their own physical projects. So our 3D printers are very popular. We print all kinds of things for anyone. Toys and trinkets, prototypes for inventions, replacement parts for things that have broken, stuff like that. And a whole slew of other equipment. Our laser cutter is very popular. And we also teach classes and do special programming to sort of entertain and educate and edify.
So during this time, like many other things, the Idea Labs is closed. It's gone through a bit of a transition.
Yes.
But still very active. So what's been going on during the COVID-19 crisis at the Idea Labs at the Baldwin Public Library in Birmingham?
Well, the lab itself is closed, so there hasn't been really any activity in that physical space. Okay. But when the library shut down due to COVID, I recognized a need to continue some sort of production. So I actually took some of the 3D printers home with me so that I could work on some Idea Lab projects, internal things. And shortly after, I was contacted by one of our patrons, actually, a regular user of the Idea Lab. And he asked if I might be interested in using some of the lab's equipment and resources to produce protective equipment for first responders. And he had actually taken a design for a face shield, the headpiece of which can be 3D printed. And he had modified it a bit for added comfort. And he sent that model to me and asked if we could start printing those out. And I thought that was a great idea. So I went and retrieved the rest of the lab's 3D printers. I brought them home, set them up in my garage. And since then, my garage has been kind of a little protection equipment factory, just churning out 3D printed headbands. And the headbands use an acetate sheet, like an overhead transparency sheet, which clips onto the front and acts as the actual shield. And it's sort of the first line of defense against aerosolized virus.
So, with that being the case, you brought all those 3D printers home. I don't know anything about 3D printers. Are they big? Are they heavy? How many do you currently have in your garage? Is it what is this? What is a 3D printer in terms of size, in terms of operation? What does it do?
In the world, there's a huge variety of different types of 3D printers, and they come in all sizes. The ones that we use in the lab, they're called FDM printers. It stands for filament deposition modeling. And basically what that means is you have a big old spool of plastic filament, like a thin plastic cord, and the printer melts that down, and out of a little metal nozzle, it extrudes line by line and layer by layer three-dimensional objects. So our printers have what they call a build area of about 220 millimeters cubed. So it's a cube, about a foot in every dimension. And anything that will fit inside that theoretical cube can be printed up and built up over time using this thermoplastic. So we have 5 of them, and they're churning away in my garage. And it's not just the lab that's involved in this. As soon as the crisis began, the entire 3D printing community kind of sprang into action. And you immediately began to see designs for face masks and face shields and respirator valves and all sorts of important, vital aspects for protection and for healthcare workers, things like that. You started to see these designs springing up and being shared freely among the 3D printing community. So we at Baldwin just kind of hopped on the bandwagon and decided to put our resources to use to help with that endeavor.
So I imagine that these PPE And again, I'm just a novice. I don't know much of anything about any of this specifically, just kind of a blanket idea. A lot of these PPE, I would presume that they have very set specs that need to be met, especially if they're going to be going to these first responders and these frontline workers. How does, as opposed to crafting by hand or in another method, how does using a 3D printer help you meet those specifications? And as far as the timeliness of creating these devices, how does it help to expedite that?
Well, that's a pretty good question. There are a lot of, you can 3D print just about any kind of shape, but the resulting 3D printed object, it has certain qualities that for some devices make it less than ideal. Things like respirator valves, things like face masks. You can 3D print them, but a lot of hospitals aren't accepting them because of the nature of the part itself. 3D printed objects are a little like wood. They have a grain and they have pores, and that porosity makes them difficult to sterilize. And the reason why face shields are an ideal thing to 3D print is the actual business end of the shield is an impermeable acetate sheet, and the 3D component is only the headband that holds the sheet in front of the face. So the headband itself, the decontaminating capacity of that piece is relatively unimportant compared to the impermeable sheet, which is actually what's going to be stopping the germs from reaching the face and can be sterilized and reused pretty much indefinitely.
So that's a great process, and that's a very interesting process that you're going through there. So you're making these face shields, you're making this PPE. About how many of these shields are you making per day? Who are you delivering them to?
Another good question. So it's in our immediate group of volunteers. We have about 11 3D printers. There's the 5 that I've got, and there's several others owned by different members of the community, including most notably our original lab user who approached me with this whole idea. His name's Tommy, and a friend of his named Alex. And between the 4 or 5 of us, we've got about 11 or 12 3D printers all working. And with the 3D printed face shields, we're making about 200 a day. But luckily, in addition to the 3D printed production, we were able to team up with a company in Farmington Hills called Polyflex. And they're an automotive packaging manufacturer, and they have a huge facility set up to do injection molding, which is a different kind of manufacturing for rapidly producing objects out of plastic. They were generous enough to donate us a mold, which is quite an expensive and time-consuming thing to produce, but they donated their tooling and their machinery to produce this mold to create face shields at an extremely high rate of speed. So in addition to the 200 per day that we're all able to 3D print, they're also injection molding on our behalf around 1,500 a day. So, about 2,000 shields a day all together being produced. And that's thanks to, yes, donations from Polyflex and from other local companies donating the plastic for the shields, the raw materials for the injection molding. And these shields are going out all over town. Pretty much every major hospital system in the Metro Detroit area has received some shields from us. Beaumont, Henry Ford, Ascension, the DMC, as well as non-hospitals, other medical facilities that are still open and serving emergency, for emergency situations, ambulance services like MedStar EMS, nursing facilities and senior homes, even the Oakland County Jail. It's amazing the need. Requests continue to pour in. Even though we've been doing this for weeks, we get probably about a dozen requests per day for these shields.
Wow, that's really interesting. Did I hear you right that you said you're making 1,500 of those a day?
Yes. It's a full-on production. And it's highly automated as well. There's very little human interaction involved in the manufacturing process there at Polyflex. The machines that mold the plastic headbands are entirely automated. The machines that trim the sprues, which are basically like auxiliary components that are discarded in the manufacturing process, these big machines come up with cutters and they snip those off and discard them. And there's a big robot arm that picks them up and packages them, puts them in boxes, and gets them ready for us to distribute.
So with all that, you mentioned that the robot arm that packages them up, it keeps the process very sterile as well. I mean, and that's very important.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that was one of the first things we ran into in our 3D printed face shield production was the sterilization. At first, we were sterilizing each shield by hand using an isopropyl alcohol solution. But as time goes on, isopropyl becomes very difficult to source. But one of the sort of convenient things about COVID is that on surfaces, it has a limited lifespan. So what we've been doing for our 3D printed shields is printing them, kitting them up into bags of about 10 each, dating them, and just leaving them be for 3 to 5 days before distributing them to their destination. And that gives them some, some modicum of decontamination that's better than nothing.
So you're creating face shields, 1,500 of those a day. Great PPE that you're providing to organizations that absolutely need them on the front lines every single day. Are you producing any other PPE at the moment, or anything else that's non-COVID related still with those 3D printers?
Well, with the Labs 3D printers, everything we're making is somehow COVID related. The only actual PPE that we're producing is the shields. But I was recently contacted by a group that is sewing cloth masks for distribution to anyone in the area who needs them. And they asked me if I could print an object called a pleat jig. You've probably seen the cloth masks, and they have 3 little folds in the front that allow them to expand and cover the face. Those pleats can be made by hand, but the process of folding them and ironing them flat is labor intensive and time consuming. And there's a 3D printed object that you can make that you basically lay a piece of cloth in there and you clamp these 2 halves together, and it automatically folds the cloth into the correct pleating configuration, so that you just stitch up the sides and you're done. It really increases the rate of speed for them to produce these masks. And so currently my 3D printers, or I should say the Labs 3D printers in my garage, are producing about 120 of those pleat jigs at the moment.
So you're producing PPE or helping to produce PPE of many different kinds. Hundreds of the masks, thousands of the masks, 1,500 every single day, helping to produce those depleted portions of those masks. For other organizations that are providing other PPE, for the organizations that your PPE is being provided to, what's the response been like with this profound amount of objects that are being created by the 3D printers every single day?
Well, as you can imagine, it's been very positive. We haven't received any negative feedback. I'm always pleased to see on our Facebook group that we have for this endeavor, first responders, after they receive the face shields, they'll generally put them on and take a group photo or something like that. And we've seen some very happy people, happy to have a little bit extra protection there that they wouldn't have been able to source otherwise due to scarcity or due to just the expense. And so we're getting a lot of positive responses from doctors and nurses and people all over, even individuals. It's been very nice, very encouraging.
That's really good to hear. I'm glad that you're making such a great impact, and it's being felt, and it's being well received, and people need these on the front lines to be able to treat this disease, treat this virus, and hopefully stop it sooner rather than later. When things do return to normal at some point, hopefully sooner rather than later, what can people do to get involved, or how can they get involved at the Idea Labs at the Baldwin Public Library?
Well, the Idea Lab is one of the rare maker spaces that's truly open to the public. There's no residency requirements. There's no age limits. You don't have to have a library card. Anyone from anywhere can come to the lab and use our equipment, use our services to learn and to make things. It's a very warm and welcoming and active space. I tell people that the only real prerequisite to use the Idea Lab is that you are a human being. That's all it takes.
That's a great prerequisite requirement. I think there's a lot of people out there that can fulfill that.
Yep.
And,
check that box.
Yeah.
Come on into the lab and get a chance to explore your creativity. You can work on projects that are highly technical. You can work on art projects. There's something for everyone in the Idea Lab.
And where can people find more information about that?
Check out our website. That's baldwinlib.org/idealab. That's where we have our list of equipment. We have a calendar of events, things like that. And coming up fairly soon, I'm sure that we'll start to see some virtual programming there, where people will have an opportunity to still participate in some Idea Lab activities, but from home.
All right, Jeff Jimison joining us today on the MegaCast, the Idea Labs Supervisor at Baldwin Public Library out of Birmingham. Anything else that you'd like to say to us, Jim, or anything else we may have not touched on that you'd like to touch on before we let you go?
Well, one of the things that's made this entire effort of face shield production possible are the generous donations from communities, from individuals, from businesses. And so if anyone is interested in participating, check out our website. Just visit baldwinlib.org. Right there on the main page, there is an option to donate to our COVID-19 relief efforts. And I would encourage anyone who's interested in making a donation to do so. That will help us keep this process going for as long as the need exists.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Jeff Jimison, Idea Labs Supervisor, Baldwin Public Library in Birmingham, joining us on the MegaCast.